I'm Danielle Smith, guest hosting for Common Sense Calgary. We are doing a series of interviews with candidates who put their name forward for the Calgary civic election. And joining me now is Devin DeFraine. He's the candidate for Ward 11. Devin, thanks so much for being with us today.
Hi, Danielle. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. So why don't we start off by talking about why it is you decided to make this decision, put your hat in the ring to be an elected council member?
Yeah, well, absolutely. Over the past 5-6 years here, I developed a keen interest in politics, so to speak. And when I saw that Jeremy Farkas was running for mayor, I decided that we needed a fiscally responsible candidate to put their foot forward and to enter this race. And that's why I chose to get into it, because I do consider myself a fiscal conservative.
So since you've mentioned Mr. Farkas, let me ask you about that. How would you judge his record over the last 4 years? Is there anything that you really support, or would you have done anything differently?
So I have been a big supporter of his over the last 4 years. I voted for him in 2017, and I am openly endorsing him for mayor. I think he's brought a voice of reason to City Hall that otherwise would have been lacking, and so I'm very impressed with how he's conducted himself. And you'll find that him and I have a great deal in common as far as our perspectives.
Okay, so he has had some difficulties in getting consensus on council to move forward on some of his ideas. What would you do differently to try to bring more people on board?
Well, I think one thing that we need to look at is potentially we have to be a little maybe a little more diplomatic in our approach to issues is what I would suggest. I've actually served on my complex condo board for the last 10 years, and my objective when I joined there was to keep condo fees in line for owners, right? Similar to what I would aim to bring to City Hall, keeping taxes in line. And there is a way, I think, to work with people from all different backgrounds, because our condo board certainly has it, and I'd really like to bring that approach downtown.
All right. Well, let's then talk about some of the big issues in your ward. What are people telling you when you talk to constituents?
Yeah, so I've been door knocking here since November, with obviously a slight break in December when we went into our total lockdown mode. But what I'm hearing a great deal about just this past weekend is obviously we've got the guidebook for great communities, and this is a very hot topic. I'm sure discussions are currently ongoing still at City Hall.
You know, talk a bit more about that. My perspective is it kind of came out of nowhere. They say that they've been consulting on it for years, but since you've been paying really close attention to council issues in the last several months, are you surprised at what's in there? And maybe we can talk about the impact it'll have on Ward 11.
Yeah, please. I was completely surprised, to be honest with you. This one snuck up on myself as well. I'll be perfectly open about that. I think that, talking to people about it, a lot of people still were unaware. I was actually outdoor knocking on Sunday, and I mentioned that the guidebook was going to be discussed the next day, and they said, wait, what's the guidebook? Mm-hmm. They had no idea.
And if I understand it, it would affect your communities almost uniformly, because it would establish multifamily zoning across the whole area. And I think most of your area would be R1, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. Right. I mean, we look at it like I grew up in Haysboro, so it's an R1 community. You think about the communities here. We've got Bayview, Eagle Ridge, we've got Lakeview, Oak Ridge, Palliser, the list goes on and on. We've got 30 communities here, and a vast majority are R1 communities. Willow Park, Maple Ridge. it definitely impacts Ward 11, maybe more so than some of the other areas.
Why do people feel so passionately about maintaining the current zoning?
When I've had discussions with them, what I'm hearing at the doors is that they bought in a specific location for a specific reason. They were looking for a community-based feel, and they wanted to do so in a manner which reflects what they were actually looking for in the first place, right? Like, I'll be the first to admit, I mean, like I said, I grew up in Haysbro. My significant other, Ashley, and we bought in Cedarbrae, and we're in a townhouse complex, right? But Cedarbrae was specifically set up with townhouses and multifamily units clustered together in one section. And then we have R1, across the way from us. And it makes sense. This community was built for that kind of density. Now, some of the older communities, like Haysbro, Calvin Grove, Chinook Park, they weren't really built in the same manner, right? They're a bit of an older community. And I think we have to take the wishes of the people who bought there into play, because they bought there specifically thinking they would have a neighbor on the left, a neighbor on the right, and that would be the end of it. When we look at some of these proposals in the guidebook, what happens if you end up with a 4-plex or an 8-plex right next door to your property?
Let me put the broader question to you, because I think this is what the next council is going to have to grapple with is, do we grow out and do greenfield development so that you can have single family homes that are affordable? And there's affordability issues associated with that. Or do you try to densify existing communities where there may be existing infrastructure, so you might be able to offer more affordable housing that way? I think the question is, how do you make sure that young families coming in or those who are low income have the ability to enter into the housing market? How do you solve that problem? How would you approach it?
Absolutely. I think it's a balancing act. And I'm going to use Haysbro because I grew up there as a prime example of this. You look at the London Towers, those are in Haysbro, and they're right beside, a heritage station on the LRT line, where there is no real impact on those R1 houses. They're on the other side of the train tracks. And, look at the South YMCA. I grew up, that's where I learned to swim. That's where I learned to weight train. Like it was a great facility. Unfortunately, it shut down and it's been barren for a while. You're right on the corner there, okay? You're not going to impact any of these R1 houses if you were to put some development there, for example. So what I'm suggesting is that instead of using this one-size-fits-all approach across the city, why don't we be strategic in targeting certain areas for development?
So this is a good time to ask a question about how the council interacts with administration, because it does seem like there's a lot of decisions that come forward already predetermined, and then it's seeking final approval from council. And there doesn't seem to be a lot of ways in which these kinds of plans can be modified. And so how do you see that role if you're an elected council member? Especially if this passes, how would you change it? What approach would you like to take to modify it?
Well, what I'd like to do is I'd like to work with the community associations that are involved, that are speaking out about this. The problem I see with council currently interacting with the city administration is that that's what you see. Council interacting with the city administration. Where is the consultation? Well, why are we not talking to people? I mean, in my mind, if you're an elected official, you're a public servant. So why are you not serving the public? Why are we not consulting with people? Why are we not going door to door and chatting with them about this? To me, it almost seems like it's a lazy approach.
All right. I'm sure we'll be able to get more opportunity to talk about that. Let's talk about some of that's one big picture issue, the issue of development. Let's talk about another big picture issue, so I can see where your view comes down on the balance between spending and tax cuts or holding the line on taxes. So let's begin with spending. Do you think the city is spending about the right amount? They're spending too much? Do you think when they do their year-over-year increases that are either inflation plus in population growth or more, do you think that that's the right track? What is sort of the general direction that you would give administration if you were sitting in those budget meetings?
So right now, I firmly believe that they are overspending. I went to Mount Royal University here and came out with a geology degree in 2015, which was perfect timing, I might add. Great time to come out with geology.
I've spoken to the geologists and geophysicists, so I know you're being very sarcastic.
How could you tell, right? And so what I see is a disconnect here. Honestly, they are spending like oil is still $120, $130 a barrel. It needs to be curbed, right? When I graduated with my degree, of course, I have to pay it off. So what did I have to do? I had to find areas in my personal budget to trim, right? Where can I save money? Where can I save a few bucks here, a few bucks there? I think with council right now, it almost seems as if they're trying to create legacies for themselves, something tangible to leave behind after the fact. And I don't think it's the right approach. Calgary is in an economic downturn. There's no doubt about it. So as families have to really watch their spending, why don't we do the same on the municipal level?
So let's talk about what that would look like, because one of the challenges that you face is that a lot of the operating budget is staff salaries and other compensation, benefits and pension. And a lot of those are sort of locked in advance in collective bargaining agreements and automatic increases in the pay grid. So do you have some other areas, or maybe that is an area? What would you do to reduce spending?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we have to examine compensation and whatnot, because at this point in time, approximately 55% of our municipal tax dollars are going to wages, benefits, and the like, and then the remaining 45% are to our actual services. So, I mean, we need to take a good hard look at this. And so I was fortunate because I actually worked in as a bouncer for 12 years here. When I was doing my schooling and whatnot, I was able to pivot, unlike some of my classmates, from that geology fallout into a successful security career. So I run the University of Calgary downtown campus security team. And so I'd like to use security as an example here. You look at private security companies right now, and the guards there are making roughly $16 to $18 an hour, and then they have a modest benefits package. I always track security jobs, just because it's my industry, right? When I see a City of Calgary job post come up for security, their starting wage is $27 an hour. They have a phenomenal benefits package plus your pension. To me, that seems a little out of touch. Like, you look at the private industry, that 16 to 18 bucks an hour with a lesser benefits package.
So let me ask you, are you suggesting that the wages for certain professions need to come down to match the equivalent in the private sector? Or are you suggesting that there are some areas where you can privatize so that you can get some of those savings?
I'm actually suggesting both. I think privatization in certain areas makes sense. And I actually saw an article the other day where transit was looking at using private security to help out with the issues we're facing, specifically on the train lines, because with the ridership down, we are getting a lot of undesirables, so to speak, using the line. And they have even mentioned themselves, hey, let's look at using private security as an option here. And I think that's a good option to go with.
Okay, let's talk about the other side of the ledger, is taxes. So we've seen a movement in the last couple of years to try to do a tax shift. There's sort of two related questions here. One is that the city budget was centered around getting a huge amount of revenue from full office towers in downtown Calgary. We now have vacancies that would amount to somewhere in the order of 100 to 140,000 employees that just aren't there anymore. And so there has to be a different approach to where you get your tax revenue from. So let's begin by talking about the tax shift, first of all, moving more of the tax base over to the residential side so that all of those remaining businesses don't end up seeing the kind of massive tax increases they have in recent years. Do you support that approach?
So for me, there's no golden ticket here, right? There's no great answer. However, for me, to keep it fair, I would have liked to have seen a 50-50 split between the two. I think we're now at 51, 52 to 48, somewhere in that range.
Just so I'm clear, because the total amount of assessment of residential is many times higher than the total amount of assessment of business. So if you're expecting to get 50% from each side, you're going to be massively increasing the amount that businesses get.
No, sorry. I just mean the split in general. I don't mean 50% should come from residential and 50 from business. I just mean the overall shift, right? Because I think we're at 50. No, I don't mean in terms of overall figures on that. Again, it's going to be tough, right? Because so many office spaces downtown have been vacated. I work downtown myself. I honestly, and this is kind of where I struggle with this, is are we going to return to those office spaces downtown? Or are we now in this element where we've discovered, hey, so many of us can work from home? Are we now shifting to home office spaces? And so in terms of densification efforts, do we now look at maybe more residential densification in downtown locations in order to make up for some of this? I'm curious about potentially doing that, because I don't know if we're going to go back to the old normal here.
And you may be right. So having more residential downtown could be an option. If there was a business attraction strategy, though, to try to bring more head offices and businesses back downtown, we've seen that the city's taken an approach where they like to set aside $100 million, Calgary Economic Development, to go out and use that for business attraction to subsidize particular companies. The other option is to keep tax rates low so that you can attract businesses. What would be your basic bent on how you'd like to see the city proceed?
So I'd like to keep tax rates low. It's funny you mentioned Calgary Economic Development. I was actually on their website earlier today, and I think the issue here is I went and looked at the staff link specifically on Calgary Economic Development, and what I saw was a lot of managers, a lot of directors, a lot of coordinators. Do we have an issue with too many leaders at the top? It comes to mind. And if so, how many departments within the city do we have this issue with? Mm-hmm. Someone had pointed this out to me, so I went and took a look. And I'm like, okay, you've got a bunch of managers, coordinators, directors of staff, all of that, but where are the people that do the work? I'm curious. And I actually joined on one of Jeremy Farkas's town halls here, and I posted the same question to him. I'm like, how many departments do we really have with this seemingly top-heavy management organizational structure? Mm-hmm. Are there savings to be had here?
That's a good question. So there's the operating side. Now let's switch over and talk about the capital side for a moment, because we've got some big ticket items, the Green Line LRT being one big ticket transportation item, but they also have 4 major capital projects that they've approved: the Event Center in conjunction with the Calgary Flames, the BMO Center expansion, as well as the Arts Common transformation and the Foothills Field House. And when the city voted to approve these projects, they did so against the advice of the CFO, who said they couldn't afford all 4 of them, but they proceeded to sanction all of them as it is. So this is the question. Do you think that, let me put it this way, if it turns out that there isn't enough money for all of those projects, is there a couple that you would put at the top of the priority list, or a couple that you would very easily say, not right now?
Yeah, absolutely. We're, like I said, Calgary is struggling a bit right now. And so I don't think we can afford to spend on all of these capital projects. Of those, the arena deal, I thought that was not in the best interests of taxpayers. I think that should have been privately funded. I don't think that the city should be putting taxpayer dollars into it. The Arts Commons expansion, again, I've been down there for multiple shows. I love concerts. I love going down there, love plays, but I felt that what we have right now is suitable. I don't think we need to be spending money there. As far as the Green Line goes, this one I've been questioning a lot of people on when I've been knocking at doors, and I'm getting a very mixed reaction to it. Of course, the reason being, right, we originally thought, hey, let's do a train line from Southeast Calgary all the way up to the airport. We'll tie into downtown. This will be great. It'll cost us $5 billion. Okay, but fast forward to now in the Southeast, we're going to come up. We haven't quite figured out how we'll tie into downtown at this point, but that'll be $5 billion plus for that segment. Well, I'm sorry, what is going on here? Yeah, give your head a shake. I mean, one idea I've been pitching to people is, what? Maybe the Green Line isn't in the best interest. What if, when we can afford it, and we can't do it right now, what if we look at tying in the Blue Line to the Calgary airport? You look at world-class cities all across the globe. What do they have in common? Your transit system is properly tied into your airport. And Calgary doesn't have that right now. So I'm actually a bigger proponent of potentially tying that Blue Line in to the Calgary airport, but not until we get our fiscal house in order. Because as
for the Green Line, do I have this right that you want to put it to a referendum?
Yes. So personally, I'm against it. I'll put that right now. However, my personal opinion is not what this is about. What this is about is the true grassroots. And so I would rather put a plebiscite referendum on the Green Line as opposed to like what's coming up, and I can't believe it's coming up, fluoridation for the 7th time. Why do we continuously waste money on something we've discussed over and over and over again? Why not discuss the bigger issues? I would have liked to have seen a plebiscite on the Green Line, and I would have liked to have seen a plebiscite on the arbitrary speed limit reduction as well. Those are items that I would like to get direct input from our citizens on. The fluoridation has been beaten to death with a stick. Like, I just don't get it.
So you are in favor of referenda in certain situations. One of the things I also saw on your platform is you're in favor of recall. I think you're the only candidate I've seen that's promoted that. Why?
Yeah, so what I'm seeing with a lot of candidates is they're in favor of term limits, right? And I think you've got part of the solution there, but I don't think you're all the way there. And the reason I say this, say your term limit is 2 terms. Let's call it like it is in the United States, for example, okay? All right, you serve your first 4 years, you get reelected because, let's be honest, in Calgary, incumbents tend to have a little bit of an edge, right? You start your next term, now you're jaded, right? Now maybe you're not feeling it like you did in your first term. You've got 4 years ahead of you, and you don't have to actually answer to the people who elected you. So for me, the reason I favor recall legislation over these term limits is, okay, now I'm that candidate, right? I've decided, okay, I've served my first term, I'm going to coast for the next 4 years. No, you're not. Because if recall legislation is in place, now you're held accountable. Now the people can say, hey, wait, what are you doing? Why are you acting like this? You better get your stuff together. Otherwise, we're going to kick you out and we'll bring somebody else in right now.
All right, we're almost done here. We've got a bunch of sort of short answer questions to go through at the end. Snow removal became a pretty big issue because of the big dump that happened on around Christmas, and then it took a long time for snow to be cleared in some of the residential areas. How big an issue was that for your ward?
Huge. And on both sides, to be honest, because of course part of my ward involves Elbow Drive. So I spoke to one gentleman on Elbow Drive, and he said, you know what, when we used to have big snow storms, the snow removal crews would make 2 passes and that would be the end of it. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm telling you, Devin, right now, I must have seen it go by 11 times, sparks flying on bare pavement. Why is this happening? I just spoke to a couple of residents over in Maple Ridge, and they said, in the 44 years we've lived here, we've seen a snowplow down our street twice. What is going on here? We need some accountability on whoever is managing these resources. Why do we have sparks flying left, right, and center? And why don't we look at potentially helping, some of the residential streets? Like, I drive old school Chevy square body trucks with the floor shift 4x4, because I know it'll get me where I need to be in Calgary in the winter. Not everyone does that. And we need to make sure that, that snow removal happens in a logistical pattern. And I think December 22nd, that's the date we had that, it was a terrible mess.
Yeah.
So we need to actually get in there and hold these managers for snow removal accountable for this stuff.
All right. Let me ask you about the issue of privatization. I don't know if having more contractors in the issue of snow removal is an option, but we do know that Ward Sutherland has been advancing the idea of having private sector garbage pickup. We talked earlier about whether we should have more private sector involved in doing security. They've talked about it for golf courses. Are you generally in favor of that kind of approach?
I absolutely am. You look at it, privatization for certain areas works very well. I mean, we can't privatize everything. I'm well aware of that. But a hybrid approach, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, working for my condominium corporation for the last 10 years on the board, what we love about it is when we're looking at big ticket items, we always go with the rule of 3. Okay. Mm-hmm. We go to 3 different contractors, we get quotes on it, we compare their scope, we decide what's the best fit for the corporation, and we move forward with it. And I think it's a great approach to use in a condo corporation. I think it's a great approach to use on your personal life. Like my mother, for example, she's looking at doing some mold remediation. She brought out a few contractors to quote on the project, because how do you know you're getting the best deal if you don't look at what's out there?
Right. All right. Only a couple more to go here. Let's talk about the defund the police campaign. That's what they're calling it. And the notion behind it is to take a portion of the funding for police and reallocate it to other types of service providers in social work, addictions, mental health. Do you support that approach?
Absolutely not.
Why not?
A couple of reasons here. Number one, I mean, I think that a government's primary job is to protect its citizenry, right? We have to protect the citizens. It just makes sense to me. So I am a big proponent of public safety. Obviously, I mentioned earlier, I worked as a bouncer for 12 years. I currently work in the security field. Literally, the University of Calgary downtown campus, we're at the old 8th and 8th Health Clinic location, which is, and I'm just going to say it, straight across from the infamous Crap Max, right?
Mm-hmm.
We see some significant issues here. And I'm telling you right now, when we make a call to the police, we need them now. And they have been phenomenal. I would be remiss to say that, you know, if we take funding away from them and it adds even another minute to a call time, a lot can happen in 1 minute.
All right. Let me ask you about fire as well then, because it's all like these are the big expense areas as well. So so this is the question, is there any places that you can find any kind of cost savings? And so in the issue of fire, when we've been talking about approving developments of new communities, one of the excuses that has been raised for not to approve those new communities is there isn't enough money to build new fire halls and to staff them. Is that an appropriate way of going forward, or do you think there's another way that fire can be delivered so that you can have both?
Well, honestly, if you are going to expand outward, you're going to have to pony up for additional fire and police. There's no question about that. And the one thing that I might recommend, you know, because I applied to 5 police services myself in 2016, and what I can tell you is there are fantastic wages in fire or a police career. They really do well. In fact, if you work for 5 years, you're over $100,000 a year, which is not typical of a lot of jobs in Calgary. But in these ones, you make a lot of money. Potentially, you could look at, you know, the starting wage for these positions. Maybe we could drop it down a little bit. Does it have to be that size? Because I'm telling you right now, when you start as a police officer or a firefighter, you're already making more than I make right off the hop.
All right.
In 5 years. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, sorry, I just wanted to get through these last questions to make sure that you had a chance to weigh in on all of them. Do you think that tax dollars should be spent on public art?
Yeah, so this is maybe one of my favorite areas to discuss at the doors. I think that there is a place for it. However, I think we're overspending on it. And if I can run this idea by you, I'd love to, because I run it by everyone. What I'm proposing is we've got the Alberta University of the Arts right here in Calgary. Why not, instead of outsourcing for a huge amount of money, let's create some scholarship competition programs for the students that go to school in the Alberta University of the Arts. Create some local art. We can do it for a fraction of the price of some of this outsourcing. It's going to have a local flair, as opposed to hiring someone from New York or over in Europe to create some artwork here. Okay, and let's get their name out there. Hey, this person went to school in Calgary. They're from Calgary. Let's get your artwork out here. Let's create, what if it's even $5,000 or $10,000? That goes a long way when you're a student. Long way. And hey, right across the train tracks, there's SAIT. Why not get some of those students to help build it?
Hey, look, my stepson went to what was then the Alberta College of Art and Design, so I can imagine that will be met with some enthusiasm by that crowd. Let me just ask you one final question about the balance between your representation role for your constituents and your duty to the City of Calgary as a member of a corporate board. If you had a decision to make that put the needs of your constituents at odds with what was best for the city, what would you do? How would you vote?
It's a great question. Obviously, in this role, we are expected to vote in the best interest of Calgary. I am of the firm belief that Ward 11, being the age that it is, it's a great cross-section of Calgary. And so my job is to represent both. But if I had to pick between the two on an issue, my job, I think, in my opinion, is to represent those that put me in office. And so Ward 11 will be my priority. And I am hopeful that what Ward 11 wants would be in line with Calgary at large. But at the end of the day, my duty is to those who put me in this position.
All right. That is Ward 11 candidate Devin DeFraine. Devin, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me, Danielle. It's been a blast.
Yeah, my pleasure.